And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
It's going to be a nice and easy episode today, Perram. No guests, no major news, although we're going to talk about, there's a significant news story.
There's some news to talk about.
But it's hardly something that's going to take a lot of time to discuss.
Right.
So I feel like it's been a while since we've had a nice casual bantery episode. And at one point after we cover the news, we are going to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a variety of reasons. And that is the mechanics and the ways that you can impact your role playing at the table in the preparation phase. Mm-hmm. But as I said, we will start with the news. The big news, just announced by Jason Bullman hours ago. Second edition is off to the printers.
Woohoo! It's out the door. It's done. They know what it is. We don't know what it is yet, but they do.
So I believe that means third edition has officially started development.
That, according to what they said about first edition, that's a true statement.
Now, just to be clear, Jason Bullman specifically says the Pathfinder Second Edition core rulebook has been sent to the printer. As we discussed a couple of episodes ago, there's 11 products coming out at launch. This is the big one. If the GM screen doesn't make it to Gen Con, I think people are going to be like, no, I was looking forward to that GM screen for landscape versus portrait reasons. But if the core rulebook didn't make it, you could be sure that there would be riots.
Yep. And also, if you didn't have, the bestiary would not be as important as the core rulebook, but that meant that we could only play the pre-written PFS modules because we don't know yet if the stats for bestiary monsters appear in adventures.
Maybe that's why goblins are in the core rulebook. So if the bestiary is delayed, just roll up a bunch of monsters, a bunch of goblin monsters.
Well, that would make Lauren happy.
That would make a lot of people happy.
Are you wanting to go on a goblins killing spree, Ryan?
It's nothing new.
I haven't had a whole good goblin adventure in almost 6 years, against goblins.
Really?
Yeah. It's the iconic monsters, of Pathfinder. And, for the first couple of years of Pathfinder, I used them a bunch. And then I had when I made my Perram's Goblins download you can get on No Direction, just a free bunch of goblin stats I made up for a much more beefy, high-level party of goblins. That's before the Villain Codex came out and did a lot of the same thing. Or no, Monster Codex. I used them then, but, since then, no goblins. None at all.
Well, Rise of the Rune Lords did get re-released. So that was a whole new audience seeing the iconic, well, not iconic, but the original goblins that really set the Pathfinder flavor for goblins. So it wasn't new, but it was a chance to re-examine those goblins.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. So do you use a lot of goblins, Ryan?
No, I tend to use them only when I'm running published stuff in PFS scenarios. I do embellish when I get a good goblin encounter, which is one of the reasons I don't want to run goblins too often, because it should still feel special, even though they're super mooks. They are the low level. They are the lowest level, just cannon fodder in the game. And what Paizo did to them elevated above that status. And so if you're going to have a goblin, it's got to be a goblin. You don't just throw a goblin in anymore.
Yeah. So I guess this is a transitioning partly into banner mode before we get to the next news segment. But what is your go-to species of adversary species? Are you an orc man, a gnoll man? Do you like to lead new campaigns off with kobolds? What are your favorites?
I thought you said gnome, and I'm like, is that after orcs? Is everyone just killing gnomes?
Well,
no,
Eberron's a weird setting.
I thought Eberron was more about evil halflings, and I feel like we've had this conversation. I've forgotten it.
No, the halflings aren't evil in Eberron. They just ride dinosaurs.
Right. So my go-to evil is humans. The majority of the time, it's bandits. It's just bullies and jerks. It's evil politicians, and it is like people will be fighting human fighters more than will be fighting any monsters early on, and pretty much consistently throughout a campaign. I tend to humanize a lot of my villains. It just feels natural. There's just so many humans out there. A majority of them, or not a majority, but a good enough chunk of them are going to be evil that they're going to show up as adversaries pretty regularly.
Yeah, I do a lot of human baddies too. I like my bandits. I like my swashbuckly spies. I like my rooftop battles. But I also like my kobolds. Kobold, because of the dungeon. Because a kobold isn't just a critter, it is a whole theme for a dungeon wrapped up in one. And it's so much fun to go down these murder hole traps that they leave behind.
Oh yeah, I didn't mention cultists. Yeah, they are definitely also part of the crew of evil humans that you should be taking out. Kobolds, you know what? I don't think I've ever run a memorable kobold thing. I enjoy kobolds conceptually, and I do like them as the tinkerers. But no, I can't think of a single example. This is just an oversight, not anything intentional. I definitely remember a memorable Gnoll dungeon, and I've brought this up a couple of times in my talk about diversifying your dungeons, because even if it makes sense that this Gnoll population is full of Gnolls, the players will eventually be, and they will eventually say like, "Oh, more Gnolls." But it was so the Gnolls were finding dead bodies of rich people, or they might have even been killing them, resurrecting them, and then they weren't enslaving them; they were indenturing them. They had to mine for more diamonds until they'd paid off the diamonds that were used to resurrect the people. And the thing was that because they were resurrecting these rich people, that when the rich nobles then found, oh, that was it. They were like stealing fingers, and you only need a part of the body to resurrect it or reincarnate it. Mm-hmm. So, they'd cut off a finger, then the family would find the body. They're rich, so they're like, we can bring him back. It's like, no, his soul's already occupying another body somewhere. It's because of these Gnolls. These Gnolls it was a very elaborate form of slave labor, but they had this diamond mine and they didn't want to mine the diamonds themselves. So they were spending resources to make resources. It's basic economics.
This sounds like a Gummy Bears episode.
Does it? Cutting off fingers, bringing people back to the dead to enslave them?
That was a pretty dark show sometimes.
That dark?
Don't know. Kinda.
I have just snippets of memories of Gummy Bears. Obviously, I remember the theme song. It's one of the best. Mm-hmm. But I just remember the ogre mooks on there were just the affable idiots, kind of like Bebop and Rocksteady if they were all just Bebop.
Mm-hmm. I have lost the thread.
Well, the thread was that 2E has gone to production. So is there anything else? Is there anything else about that needs to be covered? It's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, the core rulebook's the only one we know about. It's possible other ones went to the printer. It's possible we're going to hear about them over the next couple of weeks. I believe Eric Mona had said that this Friday was the comfortable deadline, and it being only Wednesday means that they were comfortably early on the comfortable deadline, giving them a couple of days to get the major other books out.
This is a bit late. And I think if I remember, the plan was for this to be early March shipment, if I remember the PaizoCon talks correctly. But they had that big snow outage and other things that really delayed them. I just hope that this doesn't affect the launch. And they didn't mention where the books were being printed at this time. Sometimes they do say.
Like we can assume China, right?
I assume, but then again, there's other RPG industry news that says that that's a risky venture lately.
Yeah, that was not on my news list. I know the news item you're talking about. Do you know the name of the game?
It was a supplement for Call of Cthulhu called the Sassoon Files, which was an Asian setting adventure for Call of Cthulhu, and
I didn't realize it was set in Asia.
Mm-hmm. It was a Kickstarted project that was going to be released, and the print run they had done in China was seized by the Chinese government and burned. because it was a sensitive issue, according to the Chinese government. Even though
I've
it was
seen
not
some of the
meant to be
comments.
distributed in China at all.
So apparently time travel is a taboo subject in China, especially when it relates to Chinese history, because it's disrespectful. That there may have been visible nipples showing at parts of the book, possibly even on the cover.
Oh, there is. I'm looking
Is
at
there?
the
Okay.
image now. There's this headless abomination that is very quite naked and obese, and with like way too many tentacle arms, but it is quite
All right.
naked.
So yeah, the entire production one was burned. Now they've said that the printer has actually been very good about this, and that they got their deposit back, and that all that this has really cost them is time. And you know what? It probably also got them a whole lot of exposure, so they might even be net ahead. But wow, what an odd story that was.
Yeah, this made it to mainstream media news outlets.
Oh, did it?
I started seeing like Boing Boing and Kotaku running things like this, so it wasn't just like the indie game scene reporting on this one.
Well, because it's such an easy to digest news item, like it headlines very well. So I'm not surprised that it's spread around. Oh, Dragon Elvish says that via the Paizo forums, they are getting them printed in China.
Okay. Well, let us hope that there is no burning of core rule books and we all get our orders at Gen Con. I don't see any reason why a Pathfinder book would be burned. It doesn't take place in time travel China, and it has no headless, naked abominations in it that I'm aware of. But it does have skeletons, and that is taboo in China.
Well, I guess it's just, if it's not in China, it's probably, or like if it's not set in China, it's not as on the radar. Plus, this is a small publishing company that got caught there, and they probably used a smaller printer, or they were just a lower priority at that print house. Whereas I suspect that Paizo might be the best client that the printer that they use has.
Well, I don't foresee this being a problem, but it's just the perfect time to worry about it.
We got news about Age of Ashes, which is the first adventure path for second edition.
Yes.
This was a part of the Pathfinder Friday Twitch channel where they go into the news. I believe it was James Jacobs that was on as the guest. And it was recently posted to Paizo's YouTube channel and summarized nicely by Andrew M. as he was listening to it. So he was summarizing it in the Pathfinder Second Edition channel on the No Direction Discord.
Which is a great place. You all should go there. Just go to nodirectionpodcast.com. Click the Discord link on the right-hand side. You'll be part of the coolest chat room about Pathfinder Starfinder. Completely chill.
Perram?
Toxic, not allowed.
Perram, are you familiar with the term stage whisper? You're not actually supposed to whisper. You're supposed to do a regular projection of your voice in a way that reads like a whisper.
Crap! Nah, go check out our Discord. And, also it's great that y'all's in the chat at Twitch because we film this live in front of a Twitch audience. If you got any questions for us throughout the show, ask them. We will work them into the episode. And hello, everybody. Pretty lively crowd already.
So Andrew M. Offered us bullet points of some of the major news items. We're going to be reading his bullet points. Some of these may not be super new news, but it's mixed in with some new items. So even if something sounds familiar, wait and we'll tell you more. So first of all, we know the titles and the authors of all the books for the first adventure path.
Ooh.
Hell Knight Hill by Amanda Hammond.
Okay.
And then Cult of Cinders by Eleanor Ferron.
Okay, that's very Bernie.
Tomorrow Must Burn by Ron Lundeen.
Tomorrow Must Burn is good.
Fires of the Haunted City by Linda Zayas Palmer.
Okay, I see where all these ashes are coming from.
Oh, but hold on. Against the Scarlet Triad by John Compton. Combo Breaker. And then finally, Broken Promises by Luis Loza. The No Direction Zone, Luis Loza. Gets the sixth book, which means that he is going to be the one that is proving that second edition handles high-level play better than any previous edition, or at least any 3.x edition of the game.
Yep. Luis, I see you in chat. You're helping me fix my levels. This is all on you. Like, in all seriousness, like a lot of the reason that I want to buy into second edition, assuming that a lot of our concerns earlier were addressed with like the balance and stuff, is because of the promise of high level Pathfinder being easy and balanced to run. Because I would very much like the sweet spot of Pathfinder to not be these 5 levels in the middle of the level track. I will like the idea of enjoying the entirety of my 3-year campaign as much as I enjoy that middle part. And so, Luis, gotta make this work. It's on you.
Now, here's something. There's been a lot of focus on high-level play and fixing high-level play.
Right.
I think it's going patted on the back that low-level play seems to also be better. Like you were talking about the sweet spot and how the sweet spot's in the middle.
Yes, it is. It's like level
high-level play gets
3
complicated.
to 5
First
where
level
it starts.
5, I've heard as low as 3 and a 3 through 14 is the generous sweet spot.
I see a whole lot of groups start at level 3.
Because level 1 is awful. I've ranted about level 1 before, but like the fact that a single hit can kill a character, a critical hit is guaranteed to kill a character, and that there is no limiting access to the starting equipment for monsters, that none of the monsters follow the rules for what a balanced first level or CR1 monster should be, does not help, except for the horse. Shout out to the horse being the perfect first level first edition monster.
Okay, so now we have the species for that is going to be the new favorite for our next campaign against the horse lords. They're not mounted riders. They're just horse horde, a horde of evil horses.
So anyway, I was very critical of the playtest, and this was specifically the second part of the playtest. I thought the first part of the playtest worked pretty well. I was just disappointed that some of the GMing things that I was looking forward to ended up being less fun than the equivalent from first edition.
Right.
But the robustness of the characters at first level meant that encounters weren't just miss. Like, what's the opposite of rocket tag? No, it really is. It's rocket tag at the beginning and at the end. It's just that the rockets are bigger at the end. At the beginning, a single sword is a rocket, and you spend 20 rounds missing each other constantly until somebody actually gets a decent roll. It's really frustrating and boring and dragged out, and you need a really good GM to make low-level play interesting in first edition.
Okay. So it's Quake 3 railguns only.
Shh, I don't know. Are railguns really inaccurate?
They're pinpoint accurate, but everybody's moving around like bunnies on acid.
Okay, then no, I'm still going to say no. First level, you also don't have enough character creation options. So like if you have a concept for your character, you will not be able to execute it at first level unless that concept is attacks with dex instead of strength. Like super rudimentary things. So I am looking forward to on the short list of things that I know I am looking forward to second edition. Low-level play is one of them, and it's super important because everyone plays low-level play. That's where the stories start. Not everyone gets to the end of the story.
And we both talked about how fun those level 1 demos were. Like Pathfinder 2e, even the playtest shows really well at level 1. That is where it kind of shined.
By the way, King of Rock has an example in chat that does speak to me. He says, GoldenEye with golden gun only.
That makes a lot of sense. And I see that Kate Baker, who we are going to shout out to later, is insisting that it's Bad Horse, the thoroughbred of sin.
No, that's at the end of the adventure. He's the boss horse.
Mm-hmm. Well, you always have to have the boss to lead the horse horde.
Perram, remember when it was a novelty for Paizo employees to be...
You cut out, Ryan.
Did I? How bad? And when?
The whole point of that sentence was lost.
Really? The whole point?
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. Do you remember when it was a novelty for Adventure Paths to be written by Paizo staff?
Yeah. And it always made like a big splash when it happened.
Yeah, it used to be something that was freelanced out. Got their names.
Stop. Drop the call, come back in.
All right, I'll be back.
Sorry, gang. technical difficulties. This will be edited out. Okay.
No, leave it in. They have to understand what you go through, Perram.
Okay, 5 seconds of silence. Okay.
How do I sound?
You sound good.
Okay. So, I was saying, early Adventure Paths had this flock of Adventure Path writers that were freelancers. They really got their names known for it. Nick Logue, Greg Vaughn. Oh, there's at least one big one. Richard Pett.
Amber Scott.
They were never Paizo employees, but they were synonymous with Paizo because the Adventure Paths. Oh, there we go. King of Rock also said Richard Pett. He somehow knew exactly who I was talking about because Richard Pett is the third name in those three that you think about. Yeah, they were synonymous with the Adventure Path line. And as the crop of freelancers grew and as a lot of the freelancers at Paizo got hired by Paizo, we started to see Paizo staff being used for adventure writing. Because, you know, I'm sure it's prestigious as much as it is convenient to be using your own staff for the writing of these Adventure Paths. This is the first Adventure Path I can think of where the entire crew is Paizo employees.
Mm-hmm. Well, think about it. A lot of this probably had to be played very close to the vest. And it's a moving target. 2E up until today, it was probably being edited constantly and re-edited and rebalanced. And imagine having to write a draft for an adventure when your entire rule system keeps changing based on what the poll numbers were last week.
Yeah, perfectly reasonable. It makes sense. It's just interesting to see. I wonder if this is, if that's the only reason, or if this is a sign of things to come.
I really hope that it isn't a sign of things to come. Not that I do not love our wonderful Paizo employee writers. I very much do, and I love it when they do write. But there are a lot of freelance voices out there, and voices that used to work for Paizo that still do freelance, that do amazing work, that I do want to keep seeing their work in the Adventure Paths. Also, I don't want to see the Paizo staff burn completely out, and, you know, I want you all to be around to write good stuff later.
Oh, Luis is saying that the same thing happened with Starfinder. So the first Starfinder Adventure Path was completely done in-house. I'm asking both you, Perram, and Luis in chat. You can answer quicker than Luis.
I do not know that off the top of my head, actually. I do not know the writers. And Starfinder had a different situation because its first Adventure Path was published bi-monthly or every other monthly. I'm not really sure how the prefix
bi-monthly means both, and I hate it for it.
Yeah. So
as a fan of words, bi-monthly is a word I hate.
Yeah. So it was released every other month. So they had, like, the very first one was probably very close to the vest, but like the option number 6 was released just before Gen Con the next year. So that was plenty of time to see how the system works, make the adjustments, and get it published.
Also from the Age of Ashes Pathfinder Friday, we found out the back matter section, or at least a portion of it, is going to be called Adventurer's Toolbox, which is described as mostly bestiary, which we're used to in the back matter, but it's never been labeled as such. But also things like new spells, feats, class options, archetypes, stuff your players could earn by participating in the adventure, which there's 2 things that this tells me. One of them is we still don't know what the story is with the player companion line. This is starting to feel like maybe it's being wrapped in
we know what
matter.
the story is with the player companion line.
Do we?
It doesn't exist.
Do I?
Yeah.
Officially,
yeah. It got rolled into the World Guide line. The campaign setting and player companion guide got combined. That's what my math was about last week, if you assumed both product publishing schedule.
Yes. Okay, well then, the other point that I was making, and it's one that Luis goes to in the Discord chat, so I've also got him quoted here, although he's also in our Twitch chat right now. It's that this last point where stuff your players can earn by participating in the adventure. And it's also what I was talking about earlier about the problem with first level equipment access being a little too generous in first edition. Rarity is a way that they are going to take just the items that are available and saying, these are the reasons that these things are not available. So some things like the region that they are from, it shouldn't, like, Eastern weapons should not be rare in Eastern countries. They should not be just universally considered the rare weapons the world over. So regionally, if you are in an area that is famous for a weapon, you're going to have better access to that weapon. So it's also going to be, you need to almost unlock some of these weapons by participating in adventures, and they are going to be adventure specific or adventure leaning equipment. So if you play in an adventure that has a certain theme and weapons that are tied to that theme, or equipment, I should say, it's not just weapons, equipment that's tied to that theme is usually rare, you will probably get a little more leniency on the rarity of that item. Yeah. Which is what Luis goes into, and he says that we'll learn more about the rarity system and things, how they are locked off thematically when you get the Lost Omens World Guide, and he says quite a bit in the Second World Guide.
Ooh, wonderful. I wonder what the Second World Guide is. I hope it's something to do with monsters. Really hope it's something to do with monsters.
Now, World Guide is what you were just talking about, the combination of campaign setting and player's companions?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you think they'd go with monsters there already?
I don't know. We don't know what this World Guide beastie looks like yet. Like, we only have one example of it, and it is the most broad possible example of it, where it's literally like it literally is a guide to the world of the Inner Sea. So I don't yet know what the future of that line looks like, or the future of the products in that line look like.
You need to get Inner Sea out of your vocabulary, Perram. We aren't talking about Inner Seas and Galarians anymore. We were talking about Lost Omens. We're talking about the age now. As far as second edition terminology for the campaign setting, it talks about the age rather than the geography.
And the Lost Omens isn't the new age. It was Pathfinder 1's age. It was the whole age since the death of Aridin.
Yeah, the omen was Aridin's coming back. He didn't, so it's like, well, what's lost is not the omen, but faith in omens.
Yeah,
and so there was just a general depression.
Prophecy in general got screwed up. Like, ever since then, all prophecies have been very unreliable.
A couple more points from that Pathfinder Friday about Age of Ashes. There's a specific quote. Age of Ashes is about a bad dragon. There's a couple of follow-ups. There are going to be 4 specific named dragons in the adventure path. And Dahak, patron saint of evil dragons, who has not gotten a lot of press as far as I know in Pathfinder published material, he will factor into it. Now, Perram, you know what stands out to me about the expression, a bad dragon?
As you've said on Discord, it doesn't include the phrase evil dragon.
That's right. It seems like, and dragons are usually categorized by either color or alignment. And so the fact that they're calling it a bad dragon, not an evil dragon, brings up one very specific example that is a famous part of the adventure of the campaign setting from first edition that has never been featured in any of the adventure paths. And that is Mankari, who is a gold dragon, traditionally good, a traditionally lawful good, who is known for his eugenic experiments on consenting humans. He's not forcing anyone to do anything, but he is doing things that are traditionally in the real world frowned upon greatly. It's generally considered an evil act, and so he is the focal point of a lot of philosophical and moral debates about what makes creatures good and evil, whether he is an exception and he is in fact an evil gold dragon, or if he somehow is still good even though he's doing these terrible acts. That sounds like the kind of person that an adventure path could be written around.
Oh,
a bad dragon.
And Awesome 90 is pointing out something that we need to warn our listeners about. Don't search for the phrase bad dragon on Google. Please don't. You will get some unwelcome search results.
I'm so innocent, Perram. I can't even speculate why.
You don't
have to go into it.
This is an all ages podcast, and I cannot tell you anything more about it.
The final point is the Age of Ashes. Iconics are going to be Valeros, Seoni, Mauricio, and Kira, which is, that's a pretty iconic bunch. It's a pretty standard group of iconics. Seoni instead of Ezrin is the only interesting switch. Everyone
Can you
else
say that
is
list again?
Pillar. Valeros. Seoni.
You're right.
Mauricio.
Kira.
Kira.
That's too short.
There's usually 6 iconics in the art.
Well, at least early on, because one of them, in the first couple of runs, one of them appeared on every one of the covers.
Oh, yeah, but it's been pretty standard for a while now, at least from what I've noticed, is that adventure paths will only have 4 iconics.
Okay, I'm just wrong on that. We also have another detail from the video, is that each of the adventures is going to feature one of the main ancestries. So
featured how?
Featured in the adventure. So there's going to be a human community featured, a halfling community, an elf community, and so on.
And they are going to factor into the story, or they are going to be featured in the back matter?
I think they're going to be featured in the adventure itself, as I understand the language that James Jacobs said. So I imagine we'll see, a halfling village, an elf village, etc.
You reckon we're going to get goblins first?
Goblin.
Here's my argument.
He mentioned that there was a goblin tribe involved in the very first adventure. So probably?
I mean, that sounds like a definite yes. Why are you just saying probably?
Well, we don't know how featured they're going to be. It just sounds like they're in trouble. And that trouble could be they all got ate by one of these bad dragons.
I hope, if they're making a big deal about this, I hope it's a little bit more prominent than that.
Yeah. King of Rock also says it's set in Isker, so goblin sounds appropriate. Indeed.
It's also, there's the tradition of starting adventure paths with goblins, like the Rise of the Rune Lords, the first adventure path started with goblins, and this is a return to form, while also an opportunity to show people, but this is how these aren't your daddy's goblins. Can I do a weird, kind of unrelated anecdote?
Of course. We are nothing but weird, unrelated anecdotes.
This morning, Scarlett just walked into my bedroom and hit me in the head with her goblin plush and asked me what the goblin sounds like. And I was just like, I have been working for 10 years to answer this question.
So what does the goblin sound like? What did you
I was telling her some disjointed lines from the goblin song because it was 6 a.m. and I just got woken up by a goblin attack. So
you mean you can't quote the goblin song at 6 a.m. when you get bonked on the head by your adorable child?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Amateur.
Now, you watched the video. I just read Andrew M's summary. Was there anything about anything out? Let me try that again. Was there anything else revealed about Age of Ashes?
No, we've seemed to hit most of the major bullet points. I just wanted to make sure the ancestry feature was just one I wanted to make sure I mentioned, because I'm really wondering if they're going to follow Paizo tradition and just skip the dwarf chapter.
I'm doing the math. So if we assume there's not going to be a half elf or half orc chapter,
and we know there aren't, they said so on the video.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then isn't that the 6?
Yeah, it would be. But we've done a whole lot of ignoring dwarves in Pathfinder for 10 years. Why not? Why stop now?
Because they're in the core rule book. They're a traditional fantasy race. Ancestry now. And I like Pathfinder dwarves. I like them more than most the Quest for Sky. I think that it's worth going into some of what makes dwarves right off the bat for the new audience they're going to be bringing in with the new edition.
I mean, I love dwarves too. I want to see more dwarves. It's just I'm following a pattern of behavior, and it would not surprise me if dwarves get skipped.
Impossible. The math says they're going to do dwarves. The logic says they should be doing dwarves.
Awesome 90 agrees with me.
What's that?
Awesome 90 agrees with me. The dwarves always get shorted in Pathfinder.
Now, King of Rock is saying, doesn't James Jacob hate dwarves or dislike them? It is neither. He's just not excited about them. He's had to defend this a lot over the years. It's been things he said early on in the development of Pathfinder have been conflated and minimized to James Jacob hate dwarves. Rob McCreary loves dwarves. While Rob McCreary is the person that is most likely to defend dwarves, James Jacobs is the most likely person to say meh to dwarves.
Wait, is Rob McCreary
someone who had a lot of influence over the campaign setting? His meh opinion carried a lot of weight, but it was never dislike. It was never hate. It was just not like.
Right. They didn't turn dwarves into like some horrific version of themselves. They just mostly got ignored.
Yeah, and like dwarves are what you expect from dwarves. They added some interesting lore, but if what you think of as the prototypical dwarf doesn't excite you, well, then the Pathfinder dwarf isn't going to excite you.
Right. Is Rob writing one of these volumes?
He is not.
Darn it.
Rob is a Starfinder guy now. Rob is the head
They
Starfinder guy.
they are completely trade and use. I mean, the Starfinder team writes Pathfinder APs.
Oh, that's true.
The Pathfinder team writes Starfinder APs.
Yeah, Amanda's writing the first AP. So but Rob's in charge of Starfinder, right? Isn't he the head of the Starfinder, like the creative lead on Starfinder?
Gosh, I forget titles. Creative lead sounds right. Yes,
that's approximately his
because
role. Like
Owen is like the mechanic lead.
No, Owen's the mechanic lead.
Yeah,
is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think Rob is just like he's probably bogged down with more Starfinder responsibilities than the rest of the Starfinder team, except for maybe Owen.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, it sounds like the whole team is super busy. My sympathies to all of y'all.
They cross paths all the time, says Vanith Dreadstar. But do they cross stars? Are they star-crossed developers? You see, Perram, they cross paths, and path is in the name Pathfinder, but not in the name Starfinder.
Clever,
Follow me. I'm halfway done this explanation.
Let's move. All right. So we know that.
What?
So hey, we know that now.
Yes. The last bit of news, it's hardly news now. Last episode, when we were recording, in the middle of it, some people in chat brought up that there was a mystery chapter in the core rulebook. And we speculated on it for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. We spent a good bit of time.
Yeah. And wasn't there one chapter there was one chapter we both agreed that, it shouldn't be that. It couldn't be that.
Now, I know why I didn't want it to be that, but can you explain what that chapter is and why you specifically didn't want it to be that?
Well, I thought that since they were already going to put the Lost Omens World Guide out on the same day that the core rulebook was coming out, there would be no need for another world chapter in the core rulebook, especially since the Starfinder World chapter, while necessary at the time, mostly got outmoded when the Pact Worlds book came out shortly afterwards, meaning that now when you want to know about the Pact World, you read the Pact Worlds book. You don't go to the tiny chapter that's taking up a whole lot of space in a desperately crowded core rulebook. And we were wrong.
Yes, it was announced at Gamma during a game run by Jason Bowman, but I believe it was Eric Mona who made the announcement that the mystery chapter, which for anyone who's not clear on what makes it a mystery, it just hadn't, the content of that chapter hadn't been announced. It's not a chapter, it was deliberately being kept a mystery. So they finally announced that it was going to be a setting chapter, which Perram's argument is that it becomes redundant because of the other book that had said at the same time. Extremely valid argument. My argument against it is that I hate
it. You don't like your games married to a setting.
No, and we're going to talk about that when we get to our banter topic. But sincerely think I would not have gotten into Dungeons and Dragons, which is a major influence, an interest of my life, and has led me on most of the path that I have been on, including how I met Tina and how I work, or why I work at Blind Ferret right now. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would have got into it if the campaign setting was tied to the rulebook when I got into the game.
Right. Yeah. And it is, I think I touched on this before, but it is actually an oddity that a game wouldn't have a setting tied into its core rulebook line. In the grand scheme of all RPGs that are published, it seems to just be a D&D thing and generic game systems that are intentionally meant to play all sorts of genres are the only ones that don't have campaign settings in their books, in their main offerings.
Mm-hmm. And how many role-playing games do I play?
Exactly one.
Yes. Well, one at a time. I've changed editions and I've changed branding, but it's basically the same generic fantasy game that, as I got into Pathfinder, happened to include more world setting. Mm-hmm. But since it's going to be tied into the banter. We'll kind of use this as a transition point. I have a bad memory. We've seen a couple of examples of it already in this conversation, since you were just referencing major things we talked about last episode. And this is not a small point for me. I either remember things or I don't. It is very binary. It is frustrating for me. It's frustrating for the people in my life that have to deal with it. Yesterday, Scarlett and I made cake pops, and I literally referenced every point of the 3-step recipe 50 times, because as soon as I put the recipe down, I had totally forgotten what I had just read. Like, I don't know if I have a learning disability and I've just powered through it, but I literally, like, I remember Tina getting mad at me one time when we were watching Deep Space Nine, and I just referenced some obscure trivia for the specific episode we just watched. And she was like, you don't remember this very specific important thing that I don't remember what she was talking about, but it was very important, I assure you. But somehow you remember this obscure trivia, and it is honestly, no effort was put into the thing I do remember. In fact, much more effort was put into the thing that I don't remember. It's just, it doesn't stick. And stuff like history and geography are major sticking points. And the reason that most of my time in high school just felt like, 5 years of 8 hours a day going to a place that reinforced that I was an idiot, because the stats prove it. I take a test, I did poorly. I was a C student at best. And it's mostly because I performed poorly on tests and I have a bad memory about specific things. And the campaign setting alienates me for those reasons. And so I really do regret that the campaign setting is so tied to the second edition. It's a large reason that I've gotten no use out of, not the advanced class guide. What was the book that they just decided, the faction guide? Or what's it actually called? Hardcover book for first edition.
The Adventurer's Guide.
Yes, that's it. The Adventurer's Guide. I've gotten no use out of that, because that's all campaign specific. And it's not even just like that I actively dislike it. It's that I don't even think about that book, because the content never sunk in for me. It is a blind spot in the first edition books that I own and could be using. I just don't.
There's good content in that book that isn't, that you
I
can
believe
use
you.
outside of the
I
campaign.
would love to be thinking about it when I make other characters. I just don't. And people that read my blog, the behind the screens, know my philosophy is that different people play the game for different reasons. And one of the reasons I harp on the most inclusive version of the game as the baseline is because I would not be able to access the most important hobby of my life if it was done in a certain way. And I'm not the only one. Like, my specific problem is mine. That's, whatever. I know that colorblind people and people that use text to talkers, that's what was one of the goals of second edition, and I really commend them for that. It was just from a philosophical direction for second edition. One of the reasons that almost like my gut reaction to any second edition news, even though I don't know how much it reads when we report it here, my gut reaction is, one of the reasons that it took me a long time to finalize my PaizoCon plans is because I don't know if I wanted to be there for 4 days of talking about second edition and talking and hyping second edition, when I know that every time I hear second edition, it's just like, and I will probably eventually transition to it, but I just know that I cannot get excited about it non-organically at this point in my life.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's an interesting way to get the stance. And I don't blame you. I mean, there's a grand history in this edition, in this game, not just this edition. We haven't played this next edition, but there's a grand history in the game of creating your own worlds and adapting your own worlds. And like, the reason that there are so many quote unquote published campaign settings is those were just the people who wrote the game's home settings that eventually got published, including Pathfinder. That was James Jacobs' home campaign setting that was mostly Varesia, that eventually got blown up into what we now know as the Age of Lost Omens.
Sorry, I laughed. Darren Kaldemeyer's in chat, and he says he thinks he's got an article I might want to read. Darren Kaldemeyer did a guest blog post earlier this week saying reasons that you could get excited about second edition, and it is a good read. It doesn't specifically address some of my issues, but something I've been trying to make clear all through the playtest and all through the reporting of second edition news is that these are my issues and not some kind of objective issue or some objectively wrong thing about where second edition is going.
But because I have played a whole lot of RPGs, and because most RPGs come bundled with their own setting, I think I'm not alone that most GMs that want to run things in their own setting, it's real easy to just rip that, not like physically. Please don't physically rip up your books when I'm watching, because of my inner collector. But it's real easy to just
appreciate that it's when you're watching. Like, what people do to their books in their home time is fine.
Yeah, just don't do it when I'm watching, please. But like, it's real easy to just ignore that chapter and just run whatever world you want with the rules that are in it. I've done that with Earth Dawn. I've done that with Final Fantasy role-playing game. I've done that with hundreds of role-playing games over the years. It's almost as usually, here's the one chapter about the world, ignore that, and then go on with your day. So
this is where it specifically becomes an issue for me and a problem. And I'm going to use Adventurous as an example. And this is something I'm going to introduce what we were going to be bantering about, because we will eventually get around to it. I wanted to talk about ability scores, backstories, concepts for characters, and how they transcend the rules, how they can use the rules with them. And one of my issues, Perram, I don't like backstories. I don't like writing backstories. And the reason is that it's almost like playing a canned adventure as the player. Like, it is the same issue I have with canned adventures, where it just becomes thing more about recalling knowledge instead of being creative about knowledge, but as a character. And I can cite two specific examples in two of my recent games. One was in Hell's Rebels, where Jay specifically was trying to have a role-playing moment with me, and I was freezing and I was turning and I was looking in the book because I couldn't answer his questions, and he specifically says, like, just improvise. This is what you do. This is why we play together, why we enjoy playing with you. It's not why they play with me. We're friends. That's why we play together. But yeah, like the reason people get excited to have me as a player at their table is my improv and my engagement in the setting. And I lose that when I have a backstory, because I feel like I have to constantly be referencing it. I have to get my facts right. And I will never get those facts right. They are just not, they are vague memories at best when I am trying to incorporate them. So like, so now I've got my Curse of the Crimson Throne GM made backstories more or less mandatory, or at least that's how I interpreted it. Now that we've been playing a few sessions, I realized she just wanted backstories so that if something logically fit in with how we see our characters, like I'm playing a nobleman, or like very low lineage nobleman, and so I open doors basically by being a nobleman. I walk into the castle and I'd be like, we need to talk to so-and-so. If I wasn't this character's backstory, then that would be a series of skill checks or stealth or whatever, however we were going to do it. But just by virtue of my backstory, we fast pass through that. However, I had a very specific concept for this character, and it has completely changed, mostly because we're playing this over virtual tabletop with no cameras. And the people don't understand the quietness when it's my turn to talk. And I've just adapted that into, he is a strong silent type. He stands in the background. He tries not to ruffle any feathers, because that is just the only way I'm going to be able to play in this campaign under the set of circumstances that we've created. So now the specific example I was going to talk about with you is Adventurous. What would you say is Xavier's backstory?
That he, something about being trained about dragons and probably taught by dragons, and is some sort of an diplomat between the elves and dragons and Taldor.
Okay, so that is, I thought I'd expressed a little bit more than that, but that is a lot of what I've been playing. That Xavier, his grandmother was a diplomat to dragons. He was training to take over the family business. Dragon slayers came through the town and just killed, well, not the town, the region, killed all the dragons that he would have been a diplomat for. So now he's got all these complex, specific diplomacy skills and no one to use them on. So he moved to Taldor, changed his line of work. But my campaign trait, which is this giant chunk of text telling me very specifically things about my character, is about how my skills caught the attention of a patron who hired to bring me in there, paid my way. Many different things that were then supposed to play into the party that we had, and happened. My patron was supposed to be there. My patron was supposed to be introducing me to different people. This was supposed to be the thrust of why I'm there. And whenever it wasn't my turn to talk, all I was doing was reading over this backstory, this campaign trait, figuring out who this patron was. This patron has never been named in the campaign. He never came up, because anytime it was actually my turn to talk, it was either we have dead air and I try and figure out, just make sense of this gobbledygook that is this campaign setting that is very story specific and campaign specific and geography specific and history specific, or I just make stuff up. And that's why the Dragon Diplomat stuff, which was just an excuse for where I got my bow for my ancestral weapon trait.
That's a big of just an excuse.
Because it started small. It started as it was okay. It was a combination of that plus I'm a bard, a wit. Like, why do I have this complicated way of inspiring confidence and courage? But it was like mechanical justification. When you give me something that's something simple, like you have an ancestral weapon, you are a bard, a wit, then I can work with it. When you say you have been da 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 da, that stuff ruins role playing for me. I cannot role play that character. I cannot do the specific things that are tied to the campaign. So it's not a simple matter of just ignore that chapter from the book, just ignore those references in those rules. I have to, like, the thing that is like almost a page of text has been converted into the +2 bonus I get to perform checks. Whereas the thing that was supposed to just be you get a free bow has become the elaborate backstory. And so that's the concern, that by intertwining campaign with the character, you are denying me agency over my own character, which is my biggest sin of any role-playing game and any character. And it's forcing me to play one way. Like, if every single campaign player guide also had a campaign trait that was just called happened to be there and has no weight to it, it's like the generic theme in Starfinder and why I love that so much. And one of my concerns about second edition is that backstories are mandatory. They're one of the ABCs of your character creation. And if they don't have the themeless backstory, the backstoryless backstory, it's going to be one more thing that it's technically on my character sheet. And I have to either play a much slower, less engaged, less fun for everyone at the table game, or just ignore that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the ones in the campaign setting are super, super specific. It was this dude, and he did this stuff for you, and this girl was involved, and this is the history that you could pick. The backgrounds that are in Starfinder are even a little bit more specific, because there's only like 7 of them, but the ones that are in the Pathfinder beta, yeah, there's 7. But the ones that are in the Pathfinder beta are, you were some type of soldier, or you were some type of worker, or you were homeless. Like, it's just super broad and generic. So, like, I hope that there is just, forget it as part of that step. Yeah. But, like, I don't know how that could be super limiting, because it's like, the ones that they have listed are like as wide open as they're not, like, it doesn't pin you down to a very specific thing. It's just, you learned how to do something with skills. So
it's true. The backstories in the playtest core rulebook were broad, and other than it kind of prodding a pressure point, it's not something I had a big issue with. And mostly I focused on the mechanics rather than any actual written backstory and flavor. Mm-hmm. Although we can talk about that in a little bit. But if you remember the character creation rules for Doomsday Dawn,
oh yeah,
you only get the one background. Yeah, it's called the background, right? Not a backstory. And those were super specific and tied into the path. And they were hard. They were the hardest thing for me to GM. Mm-hmm. They were the most specific thing, and the thing I was most worried about when we were reviewing Doomsday Dawn. I was saying, because at least two traits, I can have one campaign trait that I completely ignore and doesn't matter, and I still get another trait. But by replacing 2 traits with one background, and the background is mandatory invested into an adventure path, I would just do everything I could to find the mechanics of those things and just take a Sharpie and block out the rest of the text in my physical book right in front of you, Perram. Maybe even rip off.
Please tell me to turn around. At least give me turn around, Perram.
It's like distracting the paladin when the rogue to do something illegal.
Right. Yeah. Well, for a player like you, and I'm putting my GM hat, very specific requirements for a player to have fun. First, most adventure paths, even that Paizo puts out, the campaign trait is optional. Like, it's like, here's 6 campaign traits you can take. Sometimes it'll say, try to have at least one of your players take one of these so that there is a way to hook the party into the adventure, and then not everybody has to do it. And even if everybody had to do it, as a responsible GM of you and my party, I would know Ryan doesn't have to do it, because it would ruin Ryan's fun. And ultimately, as a GM, it is your responsibility to make sure the game is fun.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, because after the experience with my first the Crimson Throne GM, and actually I should point out, in the last 2 years, I have read 2 core rulebooks for games that I'd never played before, the Playtest and Starfinder. And I've got 2 brand new GMs, Crystal, and I don't know if she's comfortable with me talking about her on the podcast, so just my Chris, the Crimson Throne GM. And it does feel like a lot of that kind of leans towards backgrounds are good. This is something you should encourage to your players. Sometimes advice for GMs is you should encourage this. It gets, again, diluted down to make them do this. This is the way to do it. This is the right way to GM, just because that's how people, interpret advice. You tend to absolutifies the advice you get. You turn James Jacobs mad about dwarves to James Jacobs hates dwarves, because that's just how conversations work. So I wanted to talk about other ways that GMs should consider encouraging players to find their characters and be able to deliver on their role playing. Because when I'm told I have to make a backstory, I doubt that the GM would force me to, even if I then explained, if you make me do this, role playing will be slower, fun will be lost. These are the things that I usually do. I cannot do those if you make me play a backstory. You may not understand it. It's very weird. It's a very me thing, but this is a reality of me. And I would really appreciate it if you could adjust this one rule so that everyone at the table benefits. That's the kind of thing that it is still hard to, like, you can empathize, but it's still hard for some people to process. Right. And ultimately, usually the main goal is we want backstories to have more fleshed out characters, to maybe have more engagement, which is, in my case, the opposite.
I try to encourage my players to give me a backstory, but, I've got players that are just there to roll the dice and engage with the story that's there. And in those cases, I either just push for, just give me something completely generic, or just ignore it. But I definitely appreciate the players that do give me backstories.
So what is it about a backstory that's important to you as a GM?
As a GM, it tells me a couple of things. First, it tells me what you're passionate about. Like, what kind of story you want your character to go through. By reading your backstory, it's usually a setup for the kind of story you want to go through. It lets me tie hooks into the campaign that directly involve your character. It allows me to make sure that I'm not going to do something in the game that contradicts the things you enjoy about your character. It just helps me work your character further into the world ahead of time when I'm doing the planning for the campaign. And that just makes it a lot easier to custom tailor the story. Even if I'm running a pre-written adventure, I will customize the crap out of them to incorporate player backgrounds. I've moved whole cities. I've made cities. I've put an entire dungeon in the middle of Rise of the Rune Lords to tie into a player background. Those things happen, and by giving me those details about your character, I can then do that. And if you give me nothing, I just have to go by other sources to try and tie you in. But like, the more info a GM gets, to a point, that's important. To a point, the 15-page essay on how your character got a sword is not helping me. But to a point, I need info in order to, I need you to give to me so that I can give back to you. But you can give to me in lots of ways. There's lots of ways to do this that isn't, hey, please write me a 3-page short story about your fantasy elf.
So I am reminded of my first Carrion Crown character. It was an elf who took a paladin, a racial archetype. I think that's what they were called. So from Advanced Race Guide, there were some archetypes that were specific to specific races, and I took one that was made for the dwarves. And this all was justified by the backstory, where he was a TN elf, met a TN human, fell in love, they had a child. He was a soldier, he went off to war, which a tour for an elf is a human's lifespan. So he came back, his human wife had died of old age, and their son had now, a half-elf, had now caught up to his maturity level, just because that's how the different races mature. And so the son grew up resentful of his father, resentful of elves, and happened to have become a powerful magus, was a big issue in the area, and the father, my character, was ordered to kill his son. And then the way I put it in the backstory was very vague about whether I did or if I abandoned my duty, but the next step of his life is he found himself living with dwarves in the inner sea, and that's where he learned the ways of this archetype. And that was the jumping on point for Carrion Crown. It was tragic backstory, felt really appropriate for the campaign setting and the themes. And I played him for the first book, and by the end of it, I was like, I have no idea how to play this character. I wrote a novel that has nothing, tells me nothing about how to role play him. And I'm abandoning this character. And Matt, who jammed the first book, but then left Carrion Crown, he left it as GM, so it was actually a good point for my one character. But anyway, so Matt told me, oh, there's a Magus later in the adventure path, and I'll make sure it was your son. And I immediately resented that, because it's like, no, my backstory was very specific that we don't know what happened to the son. That is the tragedy of my character. And by incorporating my backstory, you are ruining what I think of my character. Whereas Matt thought he was, again, doing the opposite. So anyway, I replaced this character with Walter, who has a Ripsaw glaive. So very similar to how I was playing an elf who has a dwarf archetype. Now I was playing a human with a gnome weapon. I don't know where he got it. It never mattered. All that mattered is that he had a Ripsaw glaive, and that was the fun thing about it. He was just, the guy going around the horror movie with the chainsaw, also thematic. His backstory was that he's from a small town. Everyone went crazy, and he had to kill them all with the Ripsaw glaive. And that is the extent of Walter, and that is all I ever needed. And he has, he's basically, I roleplay him like Zangief from the Wreck-It Ralph movies. I know that Zangief's from Street Fighter, but I do that specific interpretation of Zangief. And I played him for the next 5 adventure paths, the next 5 volumes of that adventure path, and he was super fun. One, I remember his name, which I cannot say about my elf with the elaborate backstory. I knew exactly how to play him at all times. At one point, he goes crazy. And because one of the books has insanity rules, and then he comes back from it. And even though he's mostly been a joke character, he has this cathartic moment of maybe I should not have killed all the people in my village when they went crazy. Maybe they could have come back from it too. That may have been an error. And it was just he's one sentence, and he is a full character to me. But the guy that is a novel is nothing. Is unplayable.
I think this is definitely, you're not alone. I know players that are like your thing, but this is definitely not an all players thing. Some players do work well when they have their novel to set their character on a path, and would have been thrilled to have their, honestly, when you said we don't know what happened to the thing, that is usually a giant beacon to the GM to the player wants me to incorporate this in one direction or another in the storyline. Any of those big bullet points, everything in the background really should be considered Chekhov's gun. It needs to be fired before the campaign is over. And it just seems like that's just not the way you should do your characters at all, because you seem to love one sentence. You seem to love the G.I. Joe stat card. You seem to love this very bare bones thing that you then get to develop through the course of the campaign. as opposed to, you know, please submit your application in double space and triplicate with, you know, the history and your blood type and how did your mother get the scar on her cheek and those types of backgrounds.
I'm glad you brought up G.I. Joe stat cards. File cards is their technical term, Perram. Mm-hmm. I did not have that as one of my bullet points for the banter here, but that is something just as a good template for how to write an efficient backstory. Mm-hmm. And one of my examples is Dusty, because the file cards aren't just their backstory. It starts with their name, their rank, which if you know military ranks, I don't, but apparently that actually is meaningful to some people. But then it's got their primary military specialty and the secondary military specialty. And Dusty's primary military specialty is like desert warfare, or it might just be infantry. Military specialty is refrigerator repairman. Lost me?
Yep. Drop and come back. Be right back, gang. You'll still hear me.
I'm back.
So, Dusty's first specialty was desert warfare. That seems appropriate for a Dusty. And his secondary specialty?
Refrigerator repairman. And this is not elaborated on in his file card, which makes Dusty one of the most intriguing characters. Because it's like, okay, I can kind of see you need a guy who can keep the food cold when you're out in the desert. So maybe that's the connection. Like, it opens up the world of why is this guy in one of the most elite military forces in the world, and his two skills are desert warfare and fixing the fridge. Like, how good is this guy at fixing the fridge? Like, there's so few statements, but so many questions that one of the few statements they make inspires. And that's motivating for me. That is where a character comes from. Or at least that's one of the places that character comes from.
Yeah. I am also a fan, especially as the longer I GM, of the file card method. The handing my players an index card, telling them to use one side of it to give me the important bits about your character, because it really distills it into what's important. And I can't fit a lot of pages of backstory, especially when I'm dealing with 6 other players who all need their spotlight time into the story. And I have players that resent it. I've got one player that just refuses to do anything but hand me several stapled, typed pages for backgrounds. And I really pity that, because I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I can't work this all in and give everybody else the same screen time they deserve. So the small little bits of backstory. And I also like leaving parts of the backstory vague, so that they can then be tied into the campaign as it goes along. So a player can just sort of like, you know, well, this is how I tie in, because here's a good moment and a good opening to flesh out my character with something I didn't think of till just now and is appropriate to the story. Which is why I also like for characters to have skill points in plot convenience is one of my house rules. Usually,
can you elaborate on that?
Okay, so when you create your character, you're allowed to to put points in a skill called plot convenience. Like, you still have to spend your skill point on it.
You actually have them invest skill points in it. I thought this was just an expression.
No. Invest a skill point in plot convenience. And then when it becomes relevant at any point in the storyline, you can say, when a skill check comes up, you can go, oh, I have ranks in that, and then erase plot convenience and put what the skill is, so that you have something that tied into the story and you got use out of, and you can pick when that happens, and it makes it flexible. I also have them allow them to take language plot convenience as well, for the similar reasons. And since everybody has it, it usually means that sometimes it fleshes characters out in interesting ways. When it says, so wait, why does the wizard know how to blacksmith swords really, really good? That's important. or really, half-orc, you speak Tien? How did that happen? And then, it fleshes out the characters as they have to then justify that. But it does mean that the characters are able to on the fly adapt to the campaign and story that's in progress instead of putting points in something that might never see use through the game.
This does remind me, one of the few times I ever tried to make a new role-playing system whole cloth was to do a modern military fantasy game. And character creation and a lot of the ways that you do conflict resolution was based on the file card idea, where you would have your 2 specialties and then your backstory. And then anytime you had to make a check, you had an opportunity to argue for any of those points. Mm-hmm. So, and the rule was even called "That's Just Crazy Enough to Work." So a really convoluted explanation of why your refrigerator repairman skills are going to help you blow up that tank is encouraged. It flavors the campaign.
I can think of several ways that knowing how to repair a refrigerator would help you destroy a tank.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So the more of the parts of your backstory, of your file card that you can incorporate into your rolls, the bigger the bonus you get. You would get like a +3 for primary, +2 for secondary, and then +1 for any of the 3 sentences in your general backstory. Perram, can I help you?
No,
people can't hear
no,
you.
You can't.
Shaking your head. And that does remind me, there's a lot of role-playing games, a lot of indie games where character creation is about answering questions. Mm-hmm. And while I've always found these intriguing, anytime I've considered them practically, it's like not every character has an answer to these questions or needs to be interesting in these specific questions ways. Walter was interesting just by being kind of this gung-ho weirdo with a chainsaw. Mm-hmm. And so like, the idea that there is only one level of depth and everyone has to be in it means that there's virtually no depth because things are just too homogenized. Everyone is just knee-high in the pool.
Well, again, you can't project too much. I mean, there's certain groups that fits. I mean, there's certain groups where everybody writing the 20-page backstory fits. You know, in certainly the question prodding, that technique has existed because it just prompts ideas to think about these, and then where you wouldn't have thought of these angles. And also, you know, at some point in time, everybody at the table has to give as well as take. So they have to make some compromises, and in a couple of, if it means answering a couple of questions on a questionnaire about why does your character like cheesecake or hate cheesecake, then I mean, role-playing games where any person on any field that takes absolute die-hard stands on certain issues or a lot of issues then becomes a problem for the group as a whole. And sometimes that means this group's not for you if you're not willing to make these compromises.
So I'm more looking at this from the GM point of view, and a lot of the times it's the GMs that are looking for guidance. Mm-hmm. Whereas there is no one way to GM and there is no one set of rules for GMing. That's why the Game Master Guide is a guide. And so that is how these things, it's like, well, if you answer these 5 questions, this is the result, becomes problematic for me because it's like, this may be the result. Or you might end up with just this problem where everyone looks way more similar than you expected them to when you wanted to actually add depth to character creation.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how that would work with like my snowflake cards.
Snowflakes?
Yeah, snowflakes is what I use now, which isn't meant to be like this actually isn't meant to be a backstory generation method, but sort of a inspiration method, I think is more. For those of you that don't know, the snowflake cards work in that when I run a game, I set it with very, very, very strict rules. Like, you know, very, very strict character creation and background rules. That you would most TP players would probably feel is too much, where you must be a good aligned character and you can only choose a ancestry from the core rule book, and you know you can't have any nobility or backgrounds or dragons or, you know, just really, really strict rules for your character concept. But I have a deck of things called the snowflake cards that everybody gets to choose from. And how I've done it in the past is, first you could just like everybody Actually, I intended it to just be, here's all the Snowflake cards, pick the one you want. And so that way everybody got to be unique in a way that was important to them, but I didn't have overlapping. I didn't have two nobles. I didn't have one strange two-headed ogre and the other was a minotaur. It meant that the guy or girl who got to play the strange race character, they were actually the strange race because they stood out of a normal party. And the person that had the odd alignment, like the snickering evil person, got to be the snickering evil person in the party, not just one of the many snickering evil people in the party. And my players really love it. And what we ended up doing was actually, just to help further randomize it, was they drew two from the deck and picked the one they wanted, which meant that in the original deal, when I was going to do it when everybody free for all, it meant that almost none of the characters got the card they originally wanted, and they had to adapt their character based on the ones they drew.
And there was no trading?
I left it open. Like, I was really relaxed about it. But no, at the end, they just kind of wanted to play it honest with what they drew. So the person that wanted the flexible alignment ended up having a special animal companion. And so they got to have a Winterwolf as their animal companion. And the special alignment went to the person that wanted the special race. And this one that had the special race ended up being a hag. It was real interesting how it all turned out. And they are all better characters because of it. They have had a ton of fun with this. And every time I mention Snowflake cards, everybody's asking me to release them. Chat is already saying
exploded.
That. Yeah.
2 comments. But yes, it's true. People regularly, sometimes without you even bringing it up, we'll just get a random message on Facebook. Did Perram ever release those Snowflake cards? To which you reply,
nope, not yet. The problem is when I made the original Snowflake cards, I used copyrighted art and Magic Set Editor to because this was just for me. I never thought anybody would want these things. I thought it was just a random thing I would do. And so I put them together, and I can't really legally distribute those cards. I would have to do actual art and layout work for them to be released. And I know I totally can do that. But I've got a lot of projects, gang. Ryan, do I have enough projects on my plate right now?
Yes.
Yes.
And then some.
Oh, yeah.
I think most of the time when you bring up the Snowflake cards, I bring up Shadowrun's card creation, or at least the edition that I played. Mm-hmm. Does this sound familiar? If not, I can remind people how Shadowrun character creation works.
It's not familiar for me.
Okay. There is... it's almost like a bidding mechanism to your character creation, where you prioritize one of 5 elements of your character. One of them is your race. One of them is your how many points you get for your ability scores. One of them is your starting money. There might have only been 4, not 5, and I can't remember what the last one is. So basically, if you prioritize your race, you have a pick of any of the 5 races in the game. But if you have race as your second priority, you no longer are able to do ogres, which are the most powerful mechanically race in the game, which is balanced because if you do choose to be an ogre, then that means you're not going to have as much money as somebody else, or your ability scores aren't going to have as much variety, aren't going to be as high. Like, it was a really fun prioritizing, like tiering of what you want to emphasize about your character, so that then you could have a character that is like, I'm a billionaire, because they made money their most important thing. And it's like, the rest of their character might be pretty bland, but they are leaning into being a billionaire because that's what's interesting to them, or what gives them the most flexibility they want. Whereas if it's like, whoa, there is an ogre in the party, that means something. It's significant because he actually have to make a sacrifice to get the best race in the game.
I like that method. It's cool. That would be very complicated to port that to Pathfinder, though.
Oh, yes. Yes, it would. But just your Snowflake cards, at least this time, reminded me of something that I appreciate about the Shadowrun system that I played, the edition of which I don't remember.
How would you, with your very anti-background tendencies, react to a Snowflake card campaign?
I would not like it. It is exactly what I dislike. I talk about how much agency I enjoy, and odds are if I'm coming to the campaign, I'm like, I've already got a gonzo theory. And if you're telling me I can, you know what? I guess it depended on when I got my snowflake cards and how flexible you were with my interpretation of them. Because
the rule was
if I got
that
the
I
weird
was
animal companion,
very flexible, and you picked it before you created your character.
Okay, so if I got the weird animal companion thing and I basically made Quado from Total Recall, and I don't have a animal companion as much as I have a vestigial twin in my shirt,
I'd allow it. Wow, that would be hard to do.
No, I can manage.
Well, no, there is the from Sword of Lies, they made that boil familiar thing that actually gave it stats. The tumor familiar from Matt J. Harris in chat has told us it is the tumor from. Yes, we could do a tumor familiar. That would be doable.
So yeah, if I had that kind of flexibility, but like I had, have I told you about my evil monk that I played at one point?
No, I have not heard of
this
the evil monk.
was the first time we played through Kingmaker, which is funny. I believe
was he named
I feel
Bad
like
Touch?
What was his name? I don't remember. I just remember that when I had to get into character, I just licked my tooth like this, and it made me feel like I had tusks, and that was all it took to get me into character. Give me a 10-page backstory, and I will have no idea who this character is. But give me a half-orc that's evil, and is all I need, which is probably a really gross sound for audio. Sorry, people. But it also, like, it was an immediate Pavlovian response to everyone else at the table. It's like, oh, Ryan's in character right now because we just heard that gross lick of the tooth sound. Okay, so he was evil. He was lawful evil. He had gone to prison, came out of prison, tracked down Matt's character. I believe was a paladin. If not, it was a paladin tendency fighter. A Matt character. And I swore an oath to him that it's like, I am evil. You can detect. You know what? He was a paladin. It's like, you can look at me right now and you will judge me in every way possible that I am evil. But I swear to you, I am on a path to a better person. And so he believed me because he detected my alignment or in some way knew that I was lawful, or just Matt knew what was on my character sheet. And so that was our dynamic and that was our character. And at one point, I was looking up ways to keep up with with Jay's animal companion, which was a gorilla, which was in every way a better character in combat than my monk was. Yeah. And so I was just like, man, I need a better. This was 3.5, I should say. So it wasn't even a Pathfinder monk. It was a 3.5 monk. Ooh. And it was way before Ultimate Combat. Oh, but you know what? No, it might have been the trend. Oh, yeah, because it was Kingmaker. So we were actually transitioning to Pathfinder, but it was definitely before Ultimate Combat. But in a Cheliax book, there was a feat that was like, it was named after a devil or a demon. Devil? Cheliax.
Devil.
It was named after a devil. It was like Balor's Claws or something. Is Balor a devil or a demon?
I think he's a devil.
Okay. And it gives you bleed damage on an unarmed strike. And so Matt was actually arguing like that's great mechanically for you. And I was like, but it's named after a devil and my character is specifically on a path of goodness. So just because of the name of this feat, I didn't feel it was appropriate to take it. And I'm worried that that's the kind of conflict I would have with the Snowflake cards.
King of Rock is correcting us that Balor is a demon and Pit Fiend would be the devil. And I always get those mixed up because the Pit Fiend is this big old giant monster bulky thing. And Balor is this thin little like literal devil looking thing with horns and a whip. And that's why I get them confused every single time. Also, shout out to Stephen Glicker from Roll for Combat for joining us in chat and calling us both such geeks. That's some pot kettle situation there, Stephen.
I also appreciate Awesome 90 is telling me that it's before the revamped Kingmaker campaign with Ari and my Time Thief. All of which is information that I know. I just enjoy that he knows the campaigns that I've played well enough that he's quoting them back to me. And I honestly do need that sometimes. So I've talked about how like all I need is a single sentence idea or an intriguing sentence in a strange place, or just licking my teeth, and all that stuff gets me into character. One of the other things that gets me into character more than anything, and one of the things that's been frustrating me with the direction that the games seem to be going from, both from Starfinder and from reading Starfinder, is ability scores. Because if I'm ever in a situation and I'm asked a question or expected to react to something, and I'm like, shoot, I'm not sure how I would, there's two parts of my character sheet that answer that question for me. One of them is alignment, and one of them is my ability scores.
Right.
And Starfinder seems absolutely in love with having an 18 and a bunch of 10s. Those are both the most...
Those are bad. Okay, so in Starfinder, there are really 3 ability score arrays that are most commonly used when you're using point buy. One is 1814 and a bunch of 10s. And that is if you want to super one stat. That's not the most common one. The most common one is 2 16s and some change thrown around. 2 16s is my personal favorite. And that's because of how raises work in Starfinder. Up until 17, if you put a raise in the score, it jumps 2 points. So putting 2 stats at 16 means that when you get your first stat raise, they both become 18s and skip 17. So that's why it's like a nice little optimal area. So that really works in Starfinder. Most PFS characters I see have a 16 and a 16. In fact, most Starfinder characters have a 16 in Dex and a 16 in something else. Because of how Starfinder really makes Dex a super stat.
So I'm surprised to hear that, because I have no practical or very little practical Starfinder experience. I was going to say no, but very little character creation options either. Experience. But I do know that the rulebook basically says every class has a key ability.
Yes.
And it seemed to imply that you need an 18 in your key ability and nothing else matters.
No, that's interesting. You need a high stat in your key ability. Usually 16 is fine. You can get away with a 14, but I wouldn't. One of the pre-gens has a 14 in their key ability score. And we make
Is it
fun
the
of
Solarian?
Yep, we make fun of it for it. But the
Solarian also seems to be the one that contradicts the idea of key ability scores, because
it's a very mad class. You have lots of things you want. And Kate Baker says that she has several 16, 14, 14s. And that's the other one. That's the other stat array you see is 1 good stat and 2, like 1 great stat and 2 good stats.
And the lack of granularity to that completely denies me the ability to quickly reference my sheet and say, like, I know how this character would react to this. And unfortunately, that seems to be the direction that Second Edition is going, at least from what the playtest showed us. People remember our review. I probably sounded pretty positive about Second Edition until we got to character generation, and the ability scores just upset me for a couple of reasons. One is I felt completely out of control. And 2, it felt like every single character was going to have the same ability scores. This was before I read Starfinder, even though Starfinder came out first. I could not picture a game having such limited ability scores and characters still feeling unique.
You get a little bit of play, and you get more play in the beta of Second Edition than you do in Starfinder, because you're going to have one 18 in Starfinder, or at least a 16, or sorry, 1 18 or 16 in the playtest. But then your other stats, I was able to make all sorts of characters. But I had like a lot of charisma and thing. I had because you were able to use that second kicker, just about willy nilly. There are several opportunities to bump up other stats to 14 that you wanted. Getting under 10 wasn't really a possibility. That's the one, unless you wanted to voluntarily tank one, which you don't like doing.
That breaks verisimilitude to me. The idea that humans cannot get below average doesn't make sense to me. How is that the average if every single human is that as the baseline?
And to that argument, I always point to the thing in Starfinder, and I hope to goodness is in Pathfinder too. I don't see how it is like, you can just roll 4d6 drop 1. Here's how you do it. And the rules are in the Starfinder core rulebook. If you hate point buy, get some dice,
But
and go for it.
there's a difference between hating for point buy and needing, like, I prefer rolling. We've talked about this.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I can do point buy if point buy starts at 7. Because if I want to roll up, what's his name? Soren from Dragon Prince. If I rolled up Soren and his intelligence was any higher than an 8, I would be betraying that character concept, and I would be betraying any character with an intelligence higher than 8. Like, Soren's charm is that he's an idiot. And the fact that it's like, oh, you can't play a dumb character. You just can't.
You absolutely
Or you can pretend you are dumber than the stat says.
You can totally, the rule specifically says, as part of the step, you can voluntarily actually drop that stat, which will really make it for no benefit.
Which is not points buy.
No, it's not points buy.
Look, at any time I can give my character any kind of penalty. In second edition, I had a character, and I apologize for this name. His name was Ace Carter. He was a rogue that I had rolled a 3 strength, and so I just said he had no arms. And he was super charismatic and just like spent his days pretending to be a beggar, and like would go up to the party in disguise and be like, money for a crippled man, and they would give him money, and then he would spend money to gain things above his character level because he had extra money. And actually, most of the time when I run a campaign, I still have a cameo of Ace Carter somewhere. Just because this is a character that left such an impression on me, and the reason he left an impression on me is because I had to justify a 3 strength. It might have been a 5 strength, but it was a terrible strength. And this is a character I made in high school, and he's memorable to me because he had a bad stat. And just like doing away with homogenizing stats and saying like, these are the ones that are the most convenient to the system and the easiest to balance. And to heck with any character development that your stats can have. Oh, that rubs me the wrong way.
But it doesn't say that, Ryan. You're extrapolating.
But it does.
That.
But it's the only thing I can extrapolate. If it says that this is the person's charisma and the person is of average charisma, then that means, all right, fine. He's sometimes going to say something dumb, but he'll never be Kark. He'll never be the characters that are socially awkward and interesting because of it. Like, no, I was going to say my Oracle from Hell's Rebels, but no, she was like high charisma, low wisdom. And so she would say really weird things, but ultimately you got the gist that she had the best of intentions. And it was that specific combination of one high stat, one low stat in areas that overlap, that it's like, how do I justify that? That is interesting to me. Just looking at these stats and being like, it's weird. It's weird that this person could be so high wisdom, so low charisma. It's weird this guy's got such low strength, and justifying that is inspiring. And it's one less avenue for inspiration. It's one less way I could be inspired to play my characters.
I mean,
and honestly, this is one of the main reasons I didn't want to talk about this subject, because it was like looking at the ability scores and being like, I feel cut off from the characters I want to play by this very rigid system.
I would strongly recommend you roll your stats, Ryan, because yeah, I get it, but at the same time, like, the point buy for Pathfinder started at 7. That meant you never could have had your 3 combat. Like, they had to pick the base starting point.
Closer. I could have played Soren at least, and I could have played. Oh shoot, I'm forgetting my Hell's Rebels character's name, but I could have still played her. Like, Wisdom 7 was probably around what she had. I think it was an 8. Ace Carter is an exception and an extreme, and quite rare as it should be. 7 should not be so rare, impossibly rare, even from what we saw from the playtest.
I don't know what to say at this point, man. It's like, yeah, I get your point, but like, if this is really so important to you, that seems like a perfect reason to voluntarily dump a stat, or to, if you want more randomness, to grab the dice. I mean,
voluntarily dump a stat just leaves an awful taste in my mouth. It's like, we couldn't find a system that works to justify this thing, so just
no,
just whatever. Like,
the system is like this so that newbies that don't know how to make stats don't accidentally make a character that's unplayable. That's what the point buy and the pick system's all about, is to make it hard to make a mistake. When you want to take the if you want to take the rails off, that's what the other optional methods are for.
Yeah, but like at least 3.x. I don't remember if Pathfinder carried this over, but 3.x had like 5 or 6 character generation options.
Yeah. The playtest had 2, which was rolling and point pick. Starfinder has 3. And there are 3 official ones: point, buy, set array, and rolling. 3x and had 5 or 6, but several of them were just variations on rolling.
Right, and that's if we have a variation on points by, where it's like, here's beginner's points by, lowest stat is 10. Here is not even advanced, just proper points by, lowest stat is 7.
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot more reasonable to me, because I know that points by seems to be the more popular option, and if the only way to get low stats is by rolling, then you're not really satisfying people that want points by but also want interesting arrays.
Yeah,
well, I imagine Matt J. Harris has a point in chat too. He's talking about high strength wizard. Yeah, I've questioned like how high is a practical, or like taking an impractical build and seeing where you can find fun in it, which is again why Kark is such a memorable character for me, because he is a gnome fighter. He's got a strength penalty. He had a low charisma, and I made him work. And when he failed, that was fine, because I was still satisfying the character concept. He was an underdog. He was almost designed to fail most of the time, and it was just that much more satisfying when he succeeded. Mm-hmm. And what Matt J. Harris's comment reminds me of is just when I was playing second edition, some days I would sit down and roll up stats and just look at him and ask myself, who is this character? What would he be? How would he function? If I went with the most obvious class, what's the most obvious class? If I went a different direction, what is some interesting things I could do here? Like, interesting ability scores are, again, pretty germane to what I liked about the game when I first started, and disappointing to see effectively going away.
But you can't keep saying effectively going away when the
trend is away from them.
Trending away is a thing. But if the examples you're given were both books that had other ways to generate your stats, they're not gone away. They're still in the book.
But it seems like the games would prefer not doing it that way.
Organized play prefers to do it one specific way because they have to balance the characters. But yeah, they emphasize one way because it's easier for new players to come into it. But like the other way was in Pathfinder in 3.5, the rolling was declared as the official method and point buy was the optional. I mean, the people that went point buy weren't complaining that the rolling was ruining their fun by being in the same pages as their book. I mean, if you're a GM, heck, house roll, because house rolls are important. This is still a game about that. Heck, this is a OGL product. You could print your house rolls, get it published, and recruit a whole bunch of people to rally behind it. I just like I get your point. Like this, if you were forced to do this method of character creation, it would totally ruin your day because you can't, make the low stat randomist stats characters. But you're not being forced unless you go into organized play, because organized play has to pick a direction. But if you're not going into organized play and you're playing home games,
but why is that off the table?
What?
Organized play.
Because you can't keep players honest with their die rolls, random die rolls.
But I'm not arguing for random die roll. I'm arguing for start at 7. Start with a penalty. Acknowledge that you can have a character that has a penalty.
I don't have an answer for that one. Organized play is going to pick a direction, and they'll have to live by it. But
yeah, and I'm not saying it's the wrong direction. I'm saying it's
not your direction.
Something I've noticed, and I find unfortunate. And another reason that if young me was getting into the game now, the things that I got enthusiastic about are the things I'm being told, good news, they're out of the game.
They're not out of the game. They're still in the book, probably. Well, they were in all the other books, so I don't see why they would cut it out of this book.
Unless we're talking about organized play.
Right. Organized play forced you to do point buy. And Pathfinder point buy, like I said, started at 7. In 3.x point buy, you started at 3.
Nice.
You like that.
Actually, in my Curse of the Crimson Throne point buy, we started at 0. She just said, like, it's 1 for 1, because actually when I looked at the system, it's like, wow, it really is pretty similar. Like the whole, I get why the math is so janky for points buy, but when given complete freedom, it was like, I'm basically coming up with the same stats. There's not a lot of exploits. There's probably a couple of very specific exploits, and that's what that points buy got rid of, and why you need that in the rule book. But in a, like, we all trust each other small group of players, yeah, it turned out just fine, where it was just like 1 for 1.
Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with a small group of players you trust, any method will be fine as long as you're all playing by the same rules. Yeah, and we don't know what the final is going to be. For all we know, they all start at 8. We don't know.
That would be good.
Yeah,
7 would be better.
Well, 7,
because then at least I've got 2 choices of a -1 or a -2. Well, that's why 7 is better than 8.
Well, the 8, because the -2 could become a -3, and that could really hurt a character. That's why I mentioned 8. So, because you're going to get a racial penalty on that, that'll make it a 6.
Yeah, no, I'd still rather start.
There's some unlucky characters.
Look, I don't know what
the
theoretical first-time player is that has no idea that a 5 on a scale.
When was the last time you had to teach
20?
this game to a new person, Ryan? Seriously, I want to know.
I've taught most of the players in my Curse of the Crimson Throne are brand new. Laura's brand new to the game. Okay. So, yeah, regularly.
And they're not having trouble with digesting Pathfinder?
No.
As a venture officer, I'm teaching new people to play all the time. And especially for people that have never touched a role-playing game before and coming in off of 5th edition, which is a much simpler game, Pathfinder is intimidating with a maze of options, and it just really confuses them. So I really wish that some of these trap options and an easier way to quit from messing up your character worked.
Now, that's interesting that you're bringing up trap options. So one thing I noticed in a lot of the people that I've been teaching is that when they're looking at their first feat, they're taking the ones that are generally considered trap options, which are the ones that give you +2 to 2 skills. And I was like, this is a fascinating trend, because I look at that and immediately dismiss it as less interesting than others. And when I'm looking into it, what's happening is that they are learning the game, and they have already learned skills. So this means something to them. And so that is an entry point. And by telling them, don't take that, that's a bad option, you are denying them their entry point. You are saying, you're not allowed baby steps or training wheels. You're not allowed to go at your own pace. The veterans know that that's a mistake. So I refuse to tell someone. There's a couple. There's like Elephant Stomper feats that it's somewhere in editing actually made a feat that has no in-game effect. That one I'll tell them, don't do. But anything else, it's like, this is what spoke to you? Or actually, sorry, something that Emily did, and I think I talked about this in my last blog, is that she took a metamagic feat that she couldn't, it's like +4 to spellcasting. So she wouldn't be able to use it for 5 or 6, no, for like 9 character levels. But there's no requirement saying you need to be able to cast a 5th level spell to take this metamagic feat that turns a 1st level spell into a 5th level spell. So she took it at 1st level because the flavor was interesting to her. So that was one where I looked at and said, don't take that for these reasons. They should have put a prerequisite line. The system failed you. But otherwise, a lot of the ones that are called trap feats, it's just like, this is the feat that you need right now. This is the one that appeals to you. Let's go from there.
But it doesn't exist in a vacuum, Ryan. The game and the monsters and the adventures, especially in society play, are pre-written assuming a certain level of balance and a certain level of competency on the player's behalf. And a new player that gets their stats all jacked up, that can't get their spells selected, that have chosen a bunch of feats that don't help their character specialize in any direction, and comes to the table completely unable to complete the adventures, especially by the time they level up a few times. That's a bad time. I can't justify that as learning experience when what I can't even picture is die.
The extremes that you've just described, like
I have seen these characters at my tables more than once.
When a character comes to the table, I say, like, what do you want to play? What is your picture of fantasy? And if they tell me something fightery, I'll tell them the fightery. If they tell me something casty, I'll tell them the casty classes. And you always stay with, like, what is your concept? What do you want this character to be able to do? And then you just break it down there. So it's like, okay, so if you want to play a caster, here's your different options. So this is the smart caster. This is the one that's kind of smooth. He just gets magic. He doesn't really even understand what he's doing. And you just kind of wrap rules explanation into what their character is seeing. You always keep it to a character point of view, and they will naturally be making the choices that are like that are advantageous to making their character concept reality. And it's just focusing on ability scores and feats and stuff as the storytelling element that they are.
And if it's a player at my personal table, which I get to walk them through character creation, then yes, it's exactly what I do. The same sorts of things you're talking about. But the random 12-year-old that comes to my PFS session on Saturday, 15 minutes before the game starts with a 3rd level Pathfinder character is about to walk through the meat grinder dungeon, and they're not going to make it out the other side, and they're a liability to the... Because first 2 levels in society are hand-holdy.
All right.
And they're not just a liability to themselves, they're a liability to the rest of the party who needs competent people to exist so that they survive the dungeons. Like when you don't have the flexibility of a GM to tailor your scenario or to nurture these characters all the way from the beginning, when they're having to learn for themselves without a teacher or a mentor type person to show them the ins and outs of the 3.x system, it's real easy to learn the wrong lessons and to frustrate yourself and to throw your heads against the wall. We've talked for a long time about monster creation and how monster creation in 3.x doesn't work. The horse is the only one that is on target. And it's super easy.
That's not monster creation's fault. That's the people who are employing monster creation. Okay. There are elements that are a problem with the system, but...
Yeah. And it is super easy to make a really unplayable character in Pathfinder. It's harder than it was in 3.x or 3 to do it, but it is super easy to make an unplayable character if you were just learning the system from the start and had no idea about the nearly 20 years of development and advice and common knowledge that has come up in its lifespan. I mean, it's the whole reason the strategy guide exists.
Yeah, but the strategy guide is a book that barely exists because they weren't sure if this was they couldn't, Paizo famously couldn't agree on the concept whether this was the advanced guide or the beginner guide. And the fact that there was no one championing the beginner guide kind of says like just how much of a need was there for this. You've got a much larger pool than when I was running PFS because I think I had like 3 tables max on a really good day. But just the idea that most of this stuff looks pretty straightforward. And if you start at the lore, you get to the character you want, and maybe not ideal, but a liability. I do not have experience with a character that was that bad. Oh, you did mention 12-year-olds, and the only time I was playing with 12-year-olds, I was handholding them. No, actually, no, I didn't handhold them through character creation. We just kind of, I don't even know if I ever looked at their character sheets. We just ran an adventure, and it was a table full of 12-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. I have had bards that use spears that aren't proficient in them, and like a selection of feats that only kind of tie together with spell choices that are humorous and super niche, and skill points chosen like they were drawing them from a bingo jar. And they were very proud of their character that was designed to fit their specific roleplay fantasy. It died every time it showed up to a table.
Okay, but you're not seeing the ones that died when they wanted to do that and were not given that freedom, and their enthusiasm died because they were given the freedom that they needed to deliver to get the game experience they wanted.
They can have that freedom and die at level 2, and that's, or they can have some advice that just makes them basic. It is your responsibility as a player to be basically competent at what the role you're going to occupy at the table is. At your home games, you have a lot more viability. In organized play, it is to achieve these missions. And if you cannot be competent, not saying optimized, I'm not saying you have to hyper optimize, but if your wizard can't even cast most of the spells they want, or if your fighter can't even hit,
how is that possibly things that you are experiencing?
I do not know how you've never run into it.
A wizard who couldn't cast? No one looked at the wizard stat sheet and
I
said,
have seen characters show up with 14 int wizards that can't cast 5th level spells. Yes.
okay, well, 14 int is different than not being able to cast at the levels that you were talking about, 1, 3.
But yeah, I have seen characters that don't know, so when they leveled up and then, oh, it's time for 5th level spells, and oh, I don't have enough stat to do that because that's one of the 1,000 rules in this giant 600-page tome.
But we're
the
getting
game
a
is
bigger
messy.
tome for second edition.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure second edition will be better at this, but I'm just saying that, oh my gosh, this game is not easy to learn, especially if you don't have a mentor figure to walk you through it. And yeah, I do say that if you made a character that is, that's solely justified by what you wanted to create and cannot do their job even to a basic extent, then yeah, you're hurting yourself and you're hurting everybody that wanted to play with you.
Well, this feels like lowest common denominator. Like, I don't know, like, what percentage of the people you're interacting with are the examples that you're saying the game really needs to focus on?
It's like a low percentage, more than one. Probably about 3 of my regulars at PFS would that have had to strongly rely on mentor figures after they've had their characters slaughtered terribly because they have a 12 streak that are a fighter and did not compensate that with the options that make that viable.
Okay, well then this is a couple of people that you could just recommend the strategy guide, or that you
and
it's easy enough to find mentors for that number of people.
We're talking about 3 out of a pool of 20. That's a sizable percentage.
Is it a pool of 20? I got the impression you had a lot more people.
I'm just using it off of my current regulars.
Okay.
I have a rotating group of about 40, but yeah.
And of the 40, how many are we talking?
I mean, any given group is at least 1 or 2 that have such a low competency of the game that they can't, that they need some assistance. And if they don't seek that assistance, then they bring characters that are pretty not playable.
All right, well, we're looking at 2 ends. You've got a guy like me who literally can't play unless I've got some freedom, and you've got some players that are given too much freedom and it's difficult for them, and you don't direct them to the NPC generating chapter at the back of the core rulebook that says, like, these are the most obvious choices. If you're having any trouble, reference those.
Yeah, when I get to mentor them, I do. When my GMs step in, they help, but it always involves the talk of, hey, this character you loved and created isn't going to work because of these reasons. And that's a talk you don't like having because you want to encourage them to have their creative freedom and vision and be the character they want to be. But this is a messy game that is that has lots of options and not all of them go together. You can have your 7 multi-class characters that can't do anything. You know that.
Yeah.
There's a reason common knowledge is to don't multi-class spellcasters, because then the spellcasting part is garbage for your character from that point forward. And like, there's ways to make these things work, but they're corner case rules and bits of options that are printed in not the core rule book, and ways that the system is adapted to make everything possible if you know about it. And when you are trying to learn Pathfinder the first time, you don't.
I don't know. I find what you're describing foreign to me, that it's like if someone's coming to the table, every experience I have with first time play mentor, so this is different. I don't know who these people, how they're getting into the game. They don't have a mentor.
They're seeing Pathfinder played here poster, and then they show up with a character. They get their book, they go to the counter, they go home and they read it and they try to make a character, and sometimes they find the society guide. Oftentimes they don't even find that. And then they come to us with this thing like literally 5 minutes before game time starts. So there's no time for the mentor to step in and help them. and then or they're from some out of town group, or they're from some home group that's been playing the game wrong for years because the GM was never mentored. There's all sorts of origin stories for these people, but I get them all the time.
So before I was running, I think it was D&D. Yeah, it was definitely D&D because it was before 4th edition. Before I was running D&D at Quantum, I was running Warhammer. And maybe that's the reason that I'm not seeing the same problem, because Warhammer, you are spending money to buy something that you don't know if it's going to be a good choice. Like, I had kids bring in armies that they spent hundreds of dollars and dozens of hours working on, only for them to realize it might not even be legal. Like, those were the times where I was like, I am really sympathetic, and the game, and it being competitive, and we were running leagues. So for me to be stepping in and being like, these are the things you should be making, is actually unfair to the people that do have system competency. Whereas a role-playing game is a togetherness activity, and one that's like, it's got a history of people wanting to mentor players and wanting to be there for others, almost to the point that that is the issue, that people overstep their bounds with how they are making recommendations. So the idea that the system needs to be so simplified that your number of choices are limited and your options are extremely limited, and that your creativity is just in a vice, I don't see the same need.
There's a big difference between your creativity as an advice, and we put some handrails on here.
I am coming from a sample size of 1.
That got cut out.
Oh, really? I said I'm coming from a sample size of 1.
It got cut out again.
I just said some things. It was clever.
It was clever. I understand. Yeah.
But are you actually understanding me? Do you think I could try?
I understand the point. I do not know what the clever sentence was.
All right. Well, ultimately, and reflects what I had said earlier, that a lot of the things that they're saying, like, here's a new edition, here's a problem it's solving. It's like, problem, I loved that. You're literally telling me you're taking away a feature for me. And it's just 4 or 5 major things that were like, you cannot access the game in the same way that were your first 3 entry points into what made you a character interesting, what made the game fun. Yeah, literally, like right there, what made the game fun has been taken away from me for 2nd edition. And it is very hard for me to get enthusiastic about small things when people are saying, like, we've got a campaign, a setting chapter in the core rulebook, but your ability scores start at 10 unless you're doing rolling. And then it's just like, oh, if I just want to play a power attack character, why can't I play a power attack fighter? Why?
Well, you can. Fighter's the one with power.
Power attack fighter? I thought power attack was barbarian exclusive.
Oh,
I have to multi-class.
No, they both have it.
Fighter / barbarian?
No. Fighter and barbarian have power attack. In fact, the barbarian one was the same name with an additional weakness that the fighter doesn't have on that same ability.
Okay, then the semantics is weird, because the idea is, if I come to the game, here's a million options. This is the one option that I happen to fall in love with, and now here's a second option. Unless those are agreed, I cannot make that character, and that's. Yeah, that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that I have a very hard time seeing myself playing 2nd edition, which was not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation was supposed to be offering that, regardless of what system you're playing, here's ways you can get into your character.
Yeah, we totally just avoided that conversation. We didn't have that conversation.
Anytime I tried to add any depth or context to it, it's like, here's why I love it. Now, here's the issue you must face, the hurdle you must get over, and here's why I don't like that hurdle. That's where we got off the rails. Anytime I dwelled on the hurdles.
Mm-hmm. Well,
are we about ready to wrap things up?
Yep.
Did you have another point? Sounded like you were about to go somewhere.
No. It's very late, and it's time to wrap up.
All right. I don't have any shout outs, so you want to just go straight to the wrap up?
Shout out to, just a quick shout out. Pathfinder Kingmaker just released its Arcane Unleashed DLC, so it might be a fun time to go back to it. They've been constantly upgrading that game since it came out. They just replaced a lot of the graphics to enhance them. They got new dragon models in. And this is a free DLC that you'll be able to download that just adds like a ton of spells to the game, including the create pit spells, which are super fun in
Matt J. Harris just gave a shout out to pit spells. I thought people hated the pit spells.
I hate being a... They're fun if you're a player and you have them, and the GM doesn't.
Every pit spell is one level lower than it should be.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that one, actually.
Mm-hmm. And I think as a player or as a GM, I look at it the same way. No, that's unbalanced. I don't want it, even if it gives my character an advantage.
Gosh, there's so
many incorporating with the GM.
Pit spells are some of the worst. Oh man, but there's so many ways.
Damage, action economy, like it's does everything in one shot. Battlefield control.
Oh yeah, and then you get spells, and you get characters that are able to spam out multiple at once, and like big areas of pit spells, and oh yeah,
man, I didn't even think of that.
Also, the rule that if you're just adjacent to the pit, you have to roll to see if you fall into it. It's a huge area of effect that is not obvious when it says it's a 10-foot by 10-foot pit, but it's actually as big as a fireball template that gets affected by it.
Matt J. Harris is saying that because they don't work on creatures larger than they are underpowered.
Huge creatures don't start showing until higher levels. I mean, at the levels that they show up in society, they are super overpowered because you don't see a lot of huge creatures at the sub 10th level. And pit spells are available a lot earlier than that.
GM won't use pit spells if players won't. Yeah,
that's like
the sign of a problematic mechanic. Not a problematic GM, like I said for a second there. Not what I meant. Problematic mechanic.
Yeah, it's right up there with Scry and Fry and all the other fun combos.
Well, thank you for joining us for episode 196 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.
Bye.